What is up, everybody? My name's Ark, your tabletop Arcanist. Welcome to the Optimizer's Anvil, where I take you on in-depth tours into powerful and fun-to-play Dungeons & Dragons builds. In my last two videos, I covered two S-tier builds, very powerful builds. So I decided to tone it down just a little bit and talk about one of my favorite A-tier builds, the Stimpak Gunner. This build combines Cleric, Artificer, and Fighter in order to maximize the bonuses we get from the Sharpshooter feat and minimize the penalties we get from using it. It's also the next best thing to a resource-independent build in that it uses so few resources that you're almost never going to feel pressed to play conservatively. And because it's only an A-tier build, your DMs aren't going to have to do too much work to incorporate it into their campaign, unless they're very much against firearms, but that can always be solved with a simple crossbow reskin. This build is also fairly simple to play and fairly simple to build, so if you're interested in optimization, this might be a great place to start if you haven't delved into it too much. Like I said, this build focuses heavily on the Sharpshooter feat, so before we get into the build, let's look at that feat. Firstly, it allows you to ignore ranged penalties with your ranged weapons, which is really fantastic, and it also allows you to ignore cover in most instances. This is really a quality of life thing in combat. It allows you to worry much less about your positioning, which is always valuable as a ranged character. But the part of this feat that we are most interested in is that it allows you to subtract 5 from your roll to hit to add plus 10 to your roll for damage, with ranged weapon attacks, of course. This is kind of insane. Most weapons won't even do 10 damage on average, so adding 10 on top of what they already do is a ton of damage at any level. But that boon is heavily mitigated by your loss of accuracy. On a normal character, it's still a pretty big boost to your DPR against most armor classes, falling off at some of the top tier armor classes like 20 through 25. The goal of this build is to boost our accuracy so high that we don't have to worry about how high our enemy's armor is and can use this feat just as much as we want to, thus allowing us to deal significant amounts of damage even to very high armored targets. Okay, with that bit of bookkeeping out of the way, let's get into the build. For our race, we're going to want custom lineage. We rely heavily on the crossbow mastery feat as well as the sharpshooter feat, like I said, so we really want that feat at level 1. No other options really even come close. And for our racial feat, we are going to take Crossbow Mastery. It's a slight boost to DPR over Sharpshooter early game because we don't really have the tools that we need in order to make Sharpshooter valuable to us yet. Stat-wise, we're going to want to max Dexterity, but we're also going to need 13 Intelligence and 13 Wisdom for our Artificer and Cleric dips. And for our level 1 class, we actually need to take a moment to talk to our DMs. This build utilizes firearms, and the rules for who gain firearm proficiency are squarely in your DM's court. They are martial weapons, so if they're available in your world widely to the public, then fighters should probably have proficiency in them. However, I don't think that's the case in most D&D campaigns. Artificers, on the other hand, mention firearms in their actual starting kit. Your DM is still allowed to say no, but I think they're a little bit less likely to do that because it is something that you are specifically given in the book. If you are a DM who is DMing for this build, or any firearm build really, and you just really hate the fact that there would be technology in your world, I would go ahead and just say it's okay, but you're going to reskin it to a slightly larger hand crossbow, maybe a medium hand crossbow that your character has either made or specifically trained with. That would explain the boost in damage and keep your world technology free. Because of all these weird caveats, I'm going to go with what I would probably rule as a DM and say that fighters don't get firearm proficiency at level 1, but artificers do. I'm also going to assume that your DM was super nice and allowed you to take a pistol at level 1 even though they're really expensive for damage calculations. If they don't allow you to do this and you're forced to use 2 hand crossbows at the beginning of the game, just shave off 1 or 2 DPR for the early calcs. So what all that means is that at level 1 we are an Artificer 1. We gain our firearm proficiency, and we also gain Constitution saving throws, which are incredibly useful for any build that utilizes concentration spells, which we will do later on down the line. Cantrip and spell-wise, we are not going to be using any spells in combat, so I would just go ahead and pick useful out-of-combat things like Mending or Long Strider, any of those sorts of spells. Equipment-wise, we'll take studded leather armor, a hand crossbow, and a pistol, providing our DM will allow us to do so. In combat, we're just going to be shooting somebody with our pistol and then shooting somebody with our hand crossbow. Pretty simple stuff. At level 2, we're going to jump out of Artificer because we want to sprint to our first ASI to get Sharpshooter, and Fighter is the only class we're going to take above level 3. Fighter 1 gives us a fighting style and second wind. For our fighting style, we are going to choose Archery. Archery gives us +2 to our attacks with ranged weapons, so as you can see, we're already preparing for that -5 that Sharpshooter is going to incur on our accuracy. At level 3, we are a Fighter 2, and we get Action Surge, which is always useful in case you either need to sprint really far in a round, or you just need to do a little bit of extra burst damage. At level 4, Fighter 3, we are going to take our subclass, and this one may surprise you a little bit. We are going to be picking up Eldritch Knight. The interesting thing about this pick is we don't really care about almost any of the Eldritch Knight subclass features. What we do care about is that it allows us to add a third of our fighter levels to our spellcasting level for determining multi-class spell slots. Further down the line, we are going to be basically using 2 level 1 spell slots per combat. However, we're only going to have 3 levels of caster in this build naturally. Eldritch Knight is going to allow us to pad those numbers and to get further and further towards being a resource-independent DPR. Further down the line, it's also going to give us access to Haste, which is just a big old damage boost. Remember, when you're picking your early level spells for Eldritch Knight, you're only allowed to pick Evocation or Abjuration spells. This limits your choice a little bit, but I'm going to give you the same advice that I gave you for Artificer in that we're not going to use almost any of these spells in combat, so just pick useful out of combat things. I'm not going to get into all of the options because they don't directly relate to the build, so this part is up to you. We also get Weapon Bond, which will allow us to summon both our main hand and offhand weapons, kind of like how a Pact of the Blade Warlock would, which is super useful in certain situations and will mean that you're most often not disarmed. At level 5, we take Fighter 4 and get our first ASI and take Sharpshooter, which is what we've been racing towards. This is a nice boost in damage and a good place to do our first damage calculation. So, spending absolutely 0 resources and just firing twice at our opponents, against an armor 10 we're going to do 25 DPR. Against armor 15 we'll do 16 DPR, and against armor 19 we'll do 9. Is this amazing? Absolutely not. However, over the next couple levels we're going to get rapid fire DPR boosts. At level 6, we are going to jump out of Fighter and dip back into Artificer because we don't yet have the ability to fire our gun multiple times without reloading. This means that getting an extra attack from Fighter right now would not actually help us at all. This can be fixed by going Artificer 2, which affords us Artificer infusions. One of those infusions is Repeating Shot. This infusion will make our pistol a +1 weapon and also give us free ammo, which is useful if your DM is keeping track of something like that. But the most important part of this infusion is that it allows us to ignore the loading property of our weapon so we can shoot it as many times as we have attacks. You are also going to learn the enhanced weapon infusion, so now your offhand crossbow is also a +1 weapon, which is great. The final infusion that's super important for us to learn is the Mind Sharpener. I talk all the time about how great the Mind Sharpener is, and as a ranged DPR, we're probably not going to be using our reaction too often to make opportunity attacks, so we're going to have our reaction free to turn failed Constitution saving throws for concentration into passes. This will be a fantastic boon for us when we're relying on concentration spells and when we can take one or the other of our weapon enhancements off because we've just found good weapons naturally in our campaign. For our next level, we're going to jump right back into Fighter to pick up that extra attack. This is the first major DPR boost that we're going to get in this class. So at level 7, Fighter 5, we are going to shoot twice with our pistol and once with our hand crossbow, dealing 45 DPR to an armor 10 target, 29 DPR to an armor 15 target, and 18 DPR to an armor 19. This has nearly doubled our DPR in just 2 levels, which is absolutely fantastic. However, we're going to keep those boosts going, particularly against high armor targets, where we still tend to struggle. At level 8, we're going to take our final Artificer level, which affords us a subclass. We're going to take one of my favorite subclasses, the Alchemist. This is going to give us access to experimental elixirs, which is just a fantastic ability. We're allowed to make one experimental elixir at random every long rest, but we can also trade level 1 spell slots for specific potions. The one that we're most interested in is Boldness, which allows us to add 1d4 to every single one of our attack rolls and 1d4 to our saving throws for a minute. It's essentially concentrationless Bless, which is amazing because it's named something different than Bless, so it stacks. Having a Bless effect that stacks with Bless is so crazy good. I can't tell you how much I love this subclass. Now, at this point, we have +2 from our archery and plus 1d4 from our experimental elixirs, so we're really going a long way towards mitigating the -5 that Sharpshooter is giving us. And at this point, we're just going to convert pretty much all of our level 1 spell slots to Boldness elixirs, so we just have them on hand whenever we want and we can keep on living our happy-go-lucky martial lifestyle. Remember when I said experimental elixir stacks with Bless? Well, we're now going to utilize that synergy by taking our first and only level of Cleric. This gives us access to, you guessed it, Bless. We now add 2d4 to each one of our attacks, which if you take our average roll is 2.5, so we're essentially adding 5 to our attack rolls. So just these two features have completely negated Sharpshooter for us. However, we also get to pick a domain right now, and we're going to take Peace Cleric, which is going to give us Emboldening Bond. This gives us kind of like a half bless. It allows us to bond several people together and give them all plus 1d4 to their attacks and saving throws that they can only use once per turn. Now, obviously, you are going to be one of the bonded creatures, so if you take your Boldness Elixir, you bless yourself and also Emboldening Bond yourself, you're blessed 2.5 times. This accuracy boost is really going to be a boon for our DPR, especially against really high armor targets. Against armor 10 targets, we're now up to 52 DPR. Against armor 15, we only lose a little bit of damage going to 48. And against armor 19, we're at 37, which is a lot of damage at this level to a high armor target. Where other builds utilizing Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master are struggling, we're doing just fine. Now, I promised a simple build, and so far we've been jumping around in classes all over the place. However, it's going to smooth out a lot for our next levels. We're going to jump back into Fighter and ride it all the way to level 20. At level 10, Fighter 6, we're going to get an ASI, which we're going to pump into our Dexterity, giving us 18 Dex. At level 11, we go Fighter 7, which gives us the Eldritch Knight feature Warcaster, but that's absolutely useless to us. At level 12, Fighter 8, we get another ASI, bumping our Dexterity to 20. At level 13, we are Fighter 9 and we get Indomitable. This is a great feature with us because it's going to combo with our Triple Bless to give us incredibly reliable saving throws. They're already really good, so the ability to reroll just gives us that added layer of safety. Our 9 levels of Fighter now divide to 3 caster levels as well for a multi-level spell slots. This means we're up to having 10 spell slots, so we can cast Bless and make a Boldness Elixir 5 times. Our Emboldening Bond is also usable 5 times a day, which gives us 5 full combats of uptime. It is at this point that we've basically become a resource-independent DPR. Even in extremely combat-heavy campaigns, you're not gonna fight 5 times a day. That's a lot of combat encounters in a 24-hour period. You're probably not even gonna fight 4 times a day, so you can afford to lose your concentration once or twice and be super solid. At level 14, Fighter 10, we get an incredibly useless ability for us in the form of Eldritch Strike. After we hit somebody with a weapon attack, it imposes disadvantage on the next saving throw we make them take, but we're not making anyone take any saving throws literally ever, so this is never going to be used for us. Don't forget you have it just in case there's some incredibly niche situation that comes up where you can make a really clutch play with some sort of stun spell or something like that, but it's really not going to come up that often, and again, you have really low intelligence, so you're going to kind of suck at making those plays. In contrast, at level 15, Fighter 11, we get one of the best fighter abilities in the form of Extra Attack 2, which now allows us to shoot with our gun 3 times and our crossbow once. We'll ignore armor 10 at this point because our accuracy is so high that we're pretty much auto-hitting them, and we'll jump right into armor 15 where we're doing 79 damage per round. Against armor 19, we still put out 66. That is a ton of damage for a basically resource-independent DPR. It's also where this build really starts to pull away from B tier and become A tier. To put it into perspective, a normal Polearm Mastery Great Weapon Master fighter is only going to be dealing 44 DPR to an armor 15 at this point. And it drops even lower at higher armor targets, dealing only 29 to armor 19. They have the same number of attacks as we do, they have the same feats, they just don't have our incredible accuracy boost that allows us to squeeze every drop of value out of Sharpshooter. At level 16, we get another ASI from Fighter 12. At this point, your dex is already 20, so you just have a million good options. You can boost your con if you want more health. If you want to boost your armor, you could take Medium Armor Master. Or my favorite option, you can take Resilience Intelligence or Resilience Wisdom. This will boost one of your odd number stats up and also give you even more reliable saving throws, which is always valuable. There really aren't any right answers at this level, so I would just pick whatever you seem to be lacking in your campaign. I mean, really, if you're dealing with a lot of elemental damage, you could even take Gift of the Chromatic Dragon from Fizzbands, which would give you resistance to an element and a slight DPR boost. The nice thing about being an alchemist storyline-wise is that any of these weirder feats you can just explain away that your character has made some sort of one-of-a-kind miracle elixir during their experiments. At level 17, we get our second Indomitable, which just makes us pretty much impervious to saving throws. And at level 18, we get our final large DPR boost. We get to pick a third level spell, which is not Abjuration or Evocation, and we are going to pick up Haste. This drops our accuracy a little bit, but we trade it off for a 5th attack using Sharpshooter, which is just too much damage to pass up. Against an armor 15 target, we're now putting out 95 damage around. And we're dealing 75 DPR to an armor 19. Again, by way of comparison, a level 20 fighter, which is 2 levels above us, just got their 5th attack. And we're still putting out about 30 DPR more than them at every armor level. That's basically like adding a whole nother level 15 character to your party, which is pretty great for consistently draining enemy health. And again, just like that level 20 fighter, we are a borderline fully resource independent character, which is absolutely fantastic. At level 19, Fighter 15, we actually get a really useful Eldritch Knight ability. Arcane Charge allows us to teleport anytime we use our Action Surge, which will be really nice in a bunch of situations, particularly when you want to get high ground. It's also always a boon to be able to disengage as a ranged DPR without having to deal with an opportunity attack. And at level 20, unfortunately, as with many multi-class builds, we kind of have a lackluster level. We get one more ASI, and we're presented with the same kind of choice that we were presented with at our earlier ASI, where we just have a wealth of options to boost our durability. So just take whatever makes the most sense for your campaign. Just remember, you can only take Resilience once, so if you already took that, you can't do it again for a different stat. So there you have it, the Stimpak Gunner, reliability and accuracy the build. It stays on or above the damage curve, it doesn't put your character at large risk of death, and it is just incredibly consistent. It also has a ton of storyline options available to it. I personally always view this build as kind of like a grizzled war veteran with a chemical dependency, really gritty and rough and tumble. But this build could also represent a whimsical tinker, or honestly be a really solid Percy DeRollo cosplay if you don't have access to non-official material. This build is open-ended enough so that anyone can put pretty much whatever personality they want on their awesome Blasty Chemist. Now, I often put in a section for dealing with this build as a DM, and there's really not much you have to do here. Like I said, it's an A tier build. It's probably at like the higher end of A tier, but it's really not scraping anything super game warping yet. So I think you can pretty much just DM normally. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and if you're interested in supporting a truly independent creator like myself, please check out my Patreon page. Everything here is scratch made by me, the builds, the scripts, the sets, everything. And every donation goes a long way towards helping me spend more time making videos like this and less time working elsewhere. I would also love to hear your comments about this build, particularly if you're playing it or DMing for it. I'd love to hear your personalities that you've applied to your Stimpak Gunners. Thank you all for watching, and keep forging on.